just had a situation last week where they tested negative, then tested positive. This thing is fucking wacky, and you do the best you can. We're doing everything the right way, and who knows with this thing? Nobody's been able to get this thing figured out yet. We've been solid. Think about me. I've been there. I shake their hands. I do all this other stuff, and I haven't had COVID. I will shake people's hands until the day I die. And with that, welcome to Stoppage, show the news of the day. Usually give it just enough time, but sometimes not enough. If this is your first time stopping by, we thank you and get ready for something you won't find anywhere else. I'm John Franklin, and I'm joined by the godfather of Fight Night Picks, Craig Allen. Craig, how are you?
I'm well. I had the chance to watch Revisionist MMA, so make sure you check that out, Fight Night Picks and FightNightPicks.net. Make sure you check that one out. Awesome new show. What would have happened if Daniel Cormier fought Brock Lesnar at UFC 200? That's the burning question. Check it out. Apart from that, I'm doing well. I'm getting my singing voice ready for this show. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm shot out of a cannon excited. I'm Blade Runner 2049 in San Francisco ready. Let's get into it.
All right, so before we get into the show, I do have a question for you, because when do you ever get an opportunity to do this? What do you think would have happened if Brock Lesnar had fought Daniel Cormier at UFC 200?
He would have beat the absolute piss out of him.
Who?
Lesnar would have beat DC.
Yeah? Interesting. All right. On this episode of Early Stoppage, we talk Khamzat Chimaev's double date, Jorge Masvidal's new training partner, and the question of will the answer be dominated? We begin with the aforementioned Brock Lesnar because he is a free agent, no longer under the employ of the WWE. There are options for Brock because there are always options for Brock because he draws eyes. Craig, if you were in Brock Lesnar's ear, what would you advise him to do with his next move?
I would say live closer to Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. You live too far away in the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan. And I'm probably Sable because I don't know who else hangs out with Brock Lesnar in the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan, Canada. What would I tell Brock Lesnar to do? Professional wrestling. I mean, yeah, the schedule is grueling, but he's one of those guys like the John Cena's of the world, the big stars where they don't have to do the little house shows and you just kind of show up to the big shows. You get the bag, you get the paper, and then you go back to a random rural plot in Saskatchewan, Canada. So if I haven't made it clear enough, professional wrestling is probably the way to go. I know a lot of people are saying Bellator. Some people built a whole show around the basis of Brock Lesnar fighting DC, but that was in the past. So it's not going to happen, moving forward. But yeah, I would say pro wrestling. I don't think MMA is the move. I know there's odds out there on Lesnar Emelianenko, and I think Lesnar is like a minus 135 favorite. I don't know if odds makers have watched Fedor's last fights, but he sucks. So yeah, Brock Lesnar wins that one easy. I just don't see any of those Legends fights happening. I don't see him partnering with Mike Tyson's for the Legend series that Tyson just talked about on Joe Rogan's podcast last week. I don't see any of that stuff happening. It's pro wrestling.
Yeah, I agree and I disagree. I do think pro wrestling is probably the smartest option for him. It's going to obviously lead to the least embarrassment. But he's a game changer, right? So WWE doesn't want him to have him in their stable. I'm sure AEW will be happy to have him in their stable. The question becomes, can they meet his number? We know the UFC can meet his number. We know Bellator can probably meet his number. So if we're talking about what am I most interested in seeing between Brock Lesnar fighting John Jones in the UFC, Brock Lesnar fighting Fedor Emelianenko in Bellator, or Brock Lesnar fighting somebody who's probably already fought in the WWE, but now in AEW. I will say there are some, and I'm not a huge wrestling guy, but there's some guys that make it on my radar just because they're social media types, like Orange Cassidy, for example, is someone that I've never watched a whole. He's this guy that's got a weird gimmick. So someone like him, it'd be interesting to see with Brock Lesnar. If I had my choice, and if I made Brock's choice, I'd take the Fedor fight because I think that, like you said, he can position a situation with Bellator where it's a one-off. He can get paid. He can demand a ton of money because that fight's going to make a ton of money. They're both past their prime, but you can make an argument they're both evenly past their prime. So from that perspective, I think that fight could be much better promoted than Kimbo Dada or Kimbo Shamrock or Gracie Shamrock. I think they're a little bit closer to the prime than any of those fights.
All right, John, well, let's move on from that hot topic and into another one because Herbert Burns' brother is a gem on social media. Gilbert's gold. I mean, he's just the greatest. He's next in line for a title shot at welterweight. On the way, he called all of his shots. He had that crazy fight with Tyron Woodley. And now he implied on Twitter that Michael Chandler was on his way to a little behind the closed doors meeting with USADA. It was kind of weird, John. We could attack this from a few different angles, but I'll shoot you straight. Is this finally the time that Michael Chandler jumps ship and goes to UFC?
I think so. Because, in the end, the UFC is like Q-Tip and Kleenex in the sense that it's the brand that's associated most closely with MMA. So someday when Michael Chandler is not a 30-year-old or a guy in his 30s like he is now, and he's a guy in his 50s or his 60s like I am, he's going to say to himself and his grandchildren, I fought MMA. What's the first thing they're going to ask him? Did you fight in the UFC? So I think that for some people, you really have to be very comfortable with yourself and content with yourself to never fight in the UFC and be happy with that, especially if there's a possibility to fight in the UFC. Most guys are always going to want to test themselves against the UFC because that's where the best fighters fight. So is Michael Chandler obviously not a UFC Hall of Famer, but is he an MMA Hall of Famer without the UFC? Absolutely. But is the UFC always going to be a piece of unfinished business for him if he doesn't go there? Also, absolutely. I think he should go.
I mean, he had the opportunity to jump ship multiple times a couple years ago. Former multiple-time lightweight champ. He's had all-time fights. I remember when he went on that 3-fight losing streak, the Alvarez fight, then he lost to Will Brooks, then he lost to Will Brooks again. Then it was a huge win streak. This guy is one of the most fun fighters to watch in all of MMA. If you like Justin Gaethje, you like Tony Ferguson, you like Dustin Poirier, then chances are you probably would like Michael Chandler if you're not a big Bellator fan. As an aside and a bit of a background on Michael Chandler, he's a guy that came in Missouri regional scene. He's got a great wrestling pedigree. He's got awesome power in hands. He is 34 years old, like you had mentioned. And his foray into Bellator, coming in from Strikeforce, he was a Coker guy before. He's been a company guy since 2010 with Bellator, one of those staple guys. And I wasn't a huge Bellator fan a long time ago. My brother, Matt Allen, if you can believe it, got me more and more into Bellator. He was always saying, Craig, you got to check out this Michael Chandler guy. He's amazing. He's like the homegrown star. Then we got deeper and deeper into Bellator. But I promised it from the jump. Michael Chandler's fourth pro fight was against somebody that you might know. And I've been really working the pipes this week trying to get ready for this. So, John, if you're not looking at his record, try and guess the fighter. Here's the band. Hold me now. I'm 6 feet from the edge and I'm thinking. Do you know who it is?
No, I have no idea.
Scott Stapp from the band Creed. That was his first fight in Bellator. I see that John wasn't a big Creed fan. I grew up a very big Creed fan, and I do not hide that, and I am a little bit prideful of it. Big Creed guy. But yeah, that was Chandler's fourth fight. But I mean, this guy's an all-timer. I think if you go to the UFC, you add to that legacy, but only if you win. Because if he goes over and he goes Will Brooks, like Will Brooks did in the UFC, then it's going to really tarnish it. So I don't really know if I want to see him go over to the UFC. I mean, beating guys like Sidney Outlaw and Benson Henderson are great. His last 2 wins and finishing them in the first round is awesome. But he's been a little chinny. I mean, the Brent Primus finish, that was a weird ankle injury. The Patricio fight, that didn't go well. He got knocked out in a minute. And if you see him, he can get dropped. He was in a bad way against Brent Primus in the rematch. I don't want to see it.
Yeah, I think Brooks just in general sort of hurts his legacy because, he lost to him and then Brooks ended up not, the Bears were not who we thought they were. But at the same time, I'd love to see him there. I think it's time to go. All right, Craig. In Toronto, Kawhi Leonard said, "Board man gets paid, won a title, and then got paid." Dustin Poirier versus Tony Ferguson is not official because the prize needs to be right. Dustin Poirier says he's a prize fighter, and the prize needs to be right. This fight needs to happen. So do you pay Dustin his asking price or pass him over for someone else at lightweight to fit the bill? And the larger question is Dustin Poirier a fighter who can demand his own price?
Yeah, he is. I mean, former interim champ. He stepped up. He fought at UFC 242. He didn't look good. He considered retirement. And then he comes back and he looks amazing against Dan Hooker. That was an all-time fight. It's either that or Zhang Weili and Joanna Jędrzejczyk for fight of the year. So Yeah, I mean, Dustin Poirier, all-timer, a grinder. I mean, people are always going to be critical of him until he maybe rematches with Conor McGregor because they're always going to talk about that loss. But that was a long time ago at featherweight. I don't think the UFC puts a lot of stock in terms of, dollars and cents as to that fight as much as the casual fans might. Casual fans, thank you for tuning in. But overall, I think you got to pay him or at least compromise up close to where his number is because you're hurting for stars right now. Dustin Poirier is a star, and he always puts on a show, and he never disappoints. I mean, when was the last time you were disappointed with a Dustin Poirier fight? I can't remember it. So, yeah, pay the guy, have the fight with Ferguson, and maybe the winner fights, maybe, and it's a stretch, they fight, Khabib or Justin Gaethje.
Yeah, this is a weird question for me because it's kind of like reminiscent of that scene in Reservoir Dogs where Mr. Pink says he doesn't tip. And he goes through this whole big thing about why he doesn't tip. And he says, listen, if you want to say that waitresses get screwed, I'm on board. If you want to make it a bill, I'll vote for it and all that. Would I let Dustin Poirier, and I don't use this term very loosely because it's very important to me what I'm about to say. Would I let Dustin Poirier be a role model for my kid? Yeah. Does that make him a super relevant and eye-drawing fighter? No. There's a lot of guys who I would never let my kid even hear talk that are more that draw more eyes than Dustin Poirier does. So I think that in the world that we live in MMA, you can't just demand the money that you want based solely on the fact that you're a good guy and a really good fighter. The list of guys that are good guys and really good fighters is much longer than the list of guys who can actually swing a pay-per-view and are, quote, needle movers. All right, the question is, and we'll get to a Diaz brother here in a second, is Dustin Poirier a needle mover? I don't think he is. So I don't think unless you're a needle mover, you can demand the price that you want. Now, do I think he's smart for asking? Of course. You should always advocate for yourself. So I'm not coming down on him. I'm just saying when the rubber meets the road and Dana White says, listen, kid, you don't move the needle, then he's going to have to sign on the dotted line.
I'm going to have to look it up on Google Trends. But one thing I don't have to look up on Google Trends. All right, John. So the MMA world went into a bit of a frenzy the other day after Ariel Helwani tweeted a video of Nick Diaz successfully doing a test cut in the year 2020. I know it's kind of hard to believe, but he's got a planned comeback. It's probably going to be sometimes next year. So after that, DC and Helwani on the show, DC said that Nick Diaz should fight Leon Edwards. And then after that was said, some other top 10 fighters in the division, they kind of formed a line and they all want to crack at Nick Diaz. My question to you, because there's a lot of them, is Nick Diaz still relevant enough to pull major numbers when the sport needs stars? And does he have a chance to pull off a top 15 win anytime soon?
Well, listen, he's a Diaz brother, and Diaz brothers always come to fight. And against the right fighter, yeah, top 15, yeah, top 5, no, probably not top 10. Top 15, I will give a Diaz brother a chance against anybody 10 to 15 for until they're at 40. I got something special.
Whoa.
I got props.
All right.
This is a planner. This is my planner. And if you look at the planner and you open it up, it has a list of important holidays, important dates. So every year in a planner, they put dates that are significant for that year. What they could probably put in here, because it happens every year, is when a Diaz brother pretends he's going to start fighting again. So I think the leaves are turning. It's about that time of year where a Diaz brother has to gain some relevance to supplement or subsidize whatever other ventures they have. They have to have enough relevance to pull that off. So I think that is more what we're looking at here. But yeah, I think Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz, they're always going to be in shape. They're always going to want to fight. They've got hands. I'd take Nick. I think Nick could get a top 15 win.
I've got hands, and I don't think he beats anybody in the top 30. The guy hasn't won in almost a decade. His last fight was over 5 years ago. And if you look at the top 15, there's one name. Actually, there's two. Robbie Lawler, but probably not. I know Lawler didn't look good in his last fight, and he's had a pretty bad track record lately, but he's not BJ Penn just yet. And maybe, and this is a stretch, he could beat Nate Diaz if Nate Diaz said, hey, Nick, I want you to win. Here's the win. And he gave up as he walked into the octagon. That's the only way that Nick Diaz is going to get a win in the top 15. Vicente Luque at 10, going to beat him. Neil Magny's going to beat him. Jeff Neal would retire him, and he's probably going to retire after a loss anyway. Jeff Neal would obliterate him. Anthony Pettis still beats him. Pettis still puts on competitive fights. His body just evades him sometimes. So, yeah, no, I don't see Nick Diaz beating anybody like that. I think for DC to say Leon Edwards, the third-ranked welterweight who's knocking on the door of a title shot, there's no way Nick Diaz beats him. That fight isn't even competitive. You could throw in, I mean, think about it. Khamzat Chimaev, I know he's going to come up. Khamzat Chimaev's not ranked. There's so many. Reese McKee would beat him. I bet you John Phillips, if John Phillips could cut from 85 to 70, he'd beat Nick Diaz. We could go through Khamzat Chimaev's record. I bet you everybody on that record could probably beat Nick Diaz right now. I don't care if he cut weight. The guy does triathlons and, you know, pounds the grass on the Vegas Strip. But apart from all that stuff, I don't see him winning a fight. None of what I saw in that video made me think, geez, this guy is going to be able to win a fight. The last relevant fight that he had where he won was against BJ Penn. None of it matters. I hate this narrative, and I had to get that off my chest.
That's fair. And listen, that was part of the BJ Penn Wash Tour. As part of the beginning of the BJ Penn Wash Tour. All right, Craig, let's talk about Dana White and COVID-19. Earlier, we had some quotes. So now let's talk about it. Dana White spoke this week about the cancellation of fights and COVID. And as he said above, it's just a weird situation. You got to roll with the punches, pun intended. Craig, many in the MMA media were critical of Dana in the early stages of this, but he has probably, NBA aside, done the best job of keeping athletes safe and healthy. These quotes take some left turns for sure, but does Dana deserve some latitude here because he's been so successful in coming back?
He's been really, stubborn, I guess. And I mean that in a good way because these cards have continued to happen. Last weekend's card, maybe it wasn't stacked name value-wise, but 7 fights on a card. It was great that they pushed it back. There wasn't too much filler. But, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel for some of the talent on these cards. And if you're a fan who, I talked to, a fair amount of people during the run of my life that aren't MMA fans. A, they think it's weird that I do what I do. And B, they clamor for the days of, a UFC 54 when there was a name attached to it. I'm going to make up a name like UFC 54, A Dragon's Fire. And they get excited because there was one pay-per-view every month and it was packed full of stars. They don't care about fights between Kai Kamaka III and Tony Kelly. They don't care about stuff like that. Like Roque Martinez and Alexander Romanov, which is a late addition to this weekend's card. They don't care about stuff like that. You have to give him credit that he's continued to have fights. It supports me. It supports everybody in the sport. It's just unfortunate when you have guys and gals testing positive for COVID, and then your president decides he's above the law, doesn't need to wear a mask, and then shakes their hand, fist bumps, and hugs them. And then after they test positive, that's a pretty bad look. And also, you brought up the NBA, the NHL. There hasn't been issues with the NHL, but nobody's talking about the NHL. Go check out those playoffs. And guess what? I just got my hat in the mail. I'm probably the first Seattle Kraken fan in the entire world. Check that out. That's a boss hat. John's not paying attention. Ran over. Look at that. They won't even have a team until 2 years from now.
That's pretty impressive. Listen, I think that Dana did a great job in coming back. I do think that he has to understand his role in the world and how when you say things like, I'm going to shake hands until I die, that's not paying any respect to people who certainly have died from COVID-19. But the fact that you can't have it both ways. You can't go through all these processes and procedures. Listen, I'm a teacher, so I have to have this argument all the time about when we should come back. But you can't have the argument of I think that we should do this, all these procedures, and that's why we've been so thorough, and yet I myself am going to be reckless. You have to either give props to the procedures or completely ignore them. You can't have both. The argument that I made I just threw this out as a question to some people was, would you send your kid back to school if you knew their teacher had COVID? And if the answer is no, then you don't really trust the process and the procedures that are in place. You're just praying for help. So that's kind of where I come at this with Dana White. He doesn't really trust the procedures and processes he has in place, or he would follow them. He's just saying, well, I don't think I'm going to get it, and if I get it, I'll still be fine. Because if not, why act so reckless? So I think that he has a responsibility to the public to be a little bit less cavalier about this.
All right, John, and we move on, and I'm going to start it this way. Wah, 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 wah. And John, Leon Edwards looks nothing like Charlie Brown, but he sure is being treated like him. And several fighters have taken shots at poor Leon. So here's the question. Why is everybody picking on Leon Edwards?
You know, and the real question is, why is everybody picking on Leon Edwards when he's such a great fighter? And, you know, you would think somebody with his credentials and his ability and his prowess would not have as many guys sniping him. Well, listen, the three-piece Minnesota of all of it, he got punked. And that's the reality of it. He got punked by Jorge Masvidal. And once you get punked, I want to say it was either Charlemagne, the God, or Van Lathan. I was listening to one of their podcasts. And they said that you need to you can never let someone punk you, because once they punk you, everyone will think they can punk you. And yes, is that a old school hard ass dad's way of looking at things? Yes, but also, is it not true? Because we're looking at it in Leon Edwards. This is a very, very high caliber fighter, and yet everybody thinks they can chirp at him because of what happened with Masvidal. And then, in all honesty, between me, you, and the Seattle Kraken hat, he snuck him a little bit. Masvidal did, so it wasn't clean. It wasn't straight up. We talked about last week whether or not these two guys should fight. Once you get punked, perception is reality, and that's what people see.
One-time performance of the night. Second fastest knockout in welterweight history at 8 seconds. Tied for the latest finish in the third round at 4:59. Former Bama champ, one successful title defense. And his last fight was last July over Rafael dos Anjos. Does everybody forget about that? Yes, because all they focus on is that one time that Jorge Masvidal said that one thing. And it doesn't matter how highly ranked Mr. Leon Edwards is. He's just not in that title contention. And even though those wins, like his only loss, in recent memory, I mean, he lost to Claudio Silva in his UFC debut. He lost to Kamaru Usman, the champ. So everybody wants to see the rematch. I'm probably the only one that wants to see the rematch. Beats Dominic Waters, Tumanov, Luque, Barberena, Sabata, Cerrone, Nelson, Dos Anjos. Would I want to see him get a win over a top 5 guy currently to get that title shot? Yeah, I think he definitely needs it. Maybe it's the winner of Covington Woodley. But the poor guy hasn't done himself any favors. I really think he's a great fighter. His last 3 fights have all been decision wins. Maybe not the most fun of fights. But yeah, I would give him the title shot. Everybody's picking on him because he's just kind of an easy target. And he really has to go out there and put on a fun, exciting fight. It's unfortunate because he has, but he's got to go back out there and reintroduce himself, if you will. Take the Gilbert Burns approach and just fight everybody every other weekend.
There you go. All right, Chris, let's move on to sparring sessions. We talked a little bit about Khamzat, Chimaev earlier. Listen, depending on who you ask, he's either a really successful fighter or MMA's boogeyman. It seems as if no one is eager to fight this guy. So this week, Dana booked him 2 opponents. No, not at the same time, but back to back. I've been watching MMA a long time. This is the first time I've ever seen this. I mean, there's always these if you win, this happens scenarios, mostly because promoters, use titles as motivation. But first off, was Dana right to do this? And Craig, is it insulting to Gerard Meerschaert?
Yeah, Gerald Meerschaert is not happy with this, and I wouldn't be either. I know if I look at the odds, I think Khamzat is a minus 500 favorite in that fight. Gerald Meerschaert's one tough SOB. I know, he had to pull out of his last fight and whatnot, but man, that guy is decent on the feet, and he's slippery on the ground, and he does great work over at Rufus Sport. All that being said, Khamzat Chimaev is a tough fight for anybody. I think he's more so a tough fight for Damian Maia, because the way that he just drags people down and gets on top of them. Reese McKee's pretty good at jiu-jitsu, and he looked amazing over him. Damian Maia is a next level, but it's old Damian Maia. It's 2 title shots, Damian Maia. So it's not the same guy that we saw in, 2008, 2009. And for Gerald Meerschaert, I love the guy. I give him a better chance than I do, Damian Maia. But yeah, this is a big slap in the face for a guy that's fought and won in Gerald Meerschaert. And it's like, oh yeah, he's a stepping stone all of a sudden. I don't like it. It's a bad look, man.
You're going to hate this answer. Side note, it's so cold in this room that I'm in. My water's getting cold as I'm sitting here. You're going to hate my response to this, but it's how I feel.
Tell me about the prelims coming up this weekend.
Who cares if Meerschaert is slapped in the face, honestly? And to say that Gerald Meerschaert is a stepping stone, he is a stepping stone. If he wasn't, you'd be building fights around him, not vice versa. This kid is a footnote, and all due respect to him, he is, and in the middle of shitting on him, all due respect to him. But listen, he is a footnote in the career of Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat Chimaev will have to be reminded that he fought Gerald Meerschaert someday. So listen, I think they should have just booked Maia and just kept Meerschaert out of the whole thing. Part of me thinks it's a Vegas Fight Island thing. I don't, because one fight's in Vegas, I think, and the other's in Fight Island. So I don't know if they're just kind of making sure they have a fight for Chimaev, and they're saying if this gets closed down, if this this car goes away, or that car goes away. Listen, they booked the kid in 10 days, so I mean it's not that they can't find another place for him to fight. But I do think. Listen, it is insulting, but I don't think that whether or not you insult Meerschaert is a big deal in the grand scheme of things. And I mean that with respect. I can't even get it out. I do mean that with respect. But this is the Chimaev show, right? He's the guy that matters. He's if I told you to make a list of 15 fighters in MMA that matter right now, he's on it, and Meerschaert's not. And that's why you can do shit like book 2 fights for a guy and completely overlook another guy. All right, Craig. Fair. Let's move on to rank them. This week, Kat Zingano said that leaving the UFC has been great for her. So this week in rank them, I'd like to pose a question to you, and it's not an easy one, but if they were easy, the chumps would do it. I want to know who you think the top 5 fighters, either that would benefit the most from leaving the UFC and going to Bellator, or just that you would like to see go from the UFC to Bellator.
First fighter, Curtis Blaydes all day. I think he wrecks the Bellator heavyweight division, and I think it's unfortunate in the UFC that he has Francis Ngannou in front of him. So that was the first one. We got that one out of the way. That was easy. Second fighter, I'll go light heavyweight, and realistically, probably Volkan Oezdemir. I think he shakes it up, makes it interesting, because we've got Phil Davis and Lyoto Machida fighting this weekend. We've got your new champion, Vadim Nemkov. I think Volkan Oezdemir, a change of scenery could probably help him out, and a good shot at the title in an interesting fight with Nemkov. He poses him a lot of problems. If I look down a little bit further, like 170, that's an interesting division. Who would have a good fight against Douglas Lima out of any of those guys? I don't know. I mean, what if Tyron Woodley fought over there? That would make it a little interesting. I know he's got a fight with Colby Covington, but Woodley's probably my guy. Get him out of the UFC way. Maybe he can make some things a little fun there. If I'm looking over at lightweight, I'm going Kevin Lee. I think Kevin Lee could really shake it up. I still think he has title aspirations. So I'm still on the Kevin Lee train. So I've got what? Kevin Lee. I've got Tyron Woodley, Volkan Oezdemir, and Curtis Blaydes. And then, if we're going to like 135, because they got a really good title fight coming up this weekend, Patchy Mix and Juan Archuleta. If I had to go with anybody, geez, this is going to be weird. Rob Font. I think Rob Font's already got a win over Sergio Pettis. Sergio Pettis is right up there in the mix. Bring Rob Font into it. He knocks guys out. I think that's fun. Sorry.
No, it's all right. You took a couple from me, so I'll say who they were. Obviously, one was very obvious, but for me, I think that it's a question of are we going with the "you're no longer welcome here," or it's smart for you to leave before you're asked to leave. In the group that's in the "it's smart for you to leave before you're asked to leave," I like Dan Ige, I like Shane Burgos, I like Rob Font. If those guys left just to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, That might be smart of them. I like Kevin Lee also doing that because he's close to being asked to leave. Asked to leave. I think Jeff Neal could fall into that category. Here's my criteria for someone who should move to Bellator. Hold on. Here's my criteria for someone who should move to Bellator. And that's a young fighter. Are you ever going to be able to surpass the level of talent in the division you're in? I don't think Kevin Lee can do it. I don't think Dan Ige can do it. Jeff Neal, maybe. I would argue maybe Neil Magny might be a better choice than Jeff Neal. But are you ever, like, if you're in one of these loaded divisions, are all of them going to move out before you're able to move up, or for you to move up, before your skills pass you? Now, in terms of guys who are getting ready to be asked to leave, that might make a move to Bellator, I like Weidman, I like Rockhold, I like them fighting each other in Bellator. You can make a case for Uriah Hall, you can make a case for Kelvin Gastelum. I really like Anthony Smith going over there because I just don't think he has enough at 205 pounds to make it happen. I think Johnny Walker might be interesting over there. And I agree with Blades. Maybe Walt Harris, someone like that. I think that the one thing you want to do in going to Bellator on your own is making it seem like you're the best fighter, not kind of like what Ryan Bader did. Ryan Bader, although he had some losses, he was able to reinvent himself in Bellator and be like, okay, he's the best guy, not in Bellator. I mean, not in the UFC right now. I think that's the play. All right, Craig, let's move on to the social. Oh, no. We haven't done this one in a while. And we have the benefit of there being a Friday and Saturday Bellator card, which what happens when there's a Friday and Saturday Bellator card? The Saturday Bellator card goes up against the UFC. So I have both the Bellator card and the UFC card next to each other. So my question for you is, where do you want to start on the UFC card? Now, guys, please, this requires you to suspend a little bit of disbelief and understand that we know they might not be running exactly concurrently, but that's the exercise here. So do you want to start in the UFC or start in Bellator?
No, I'm gonna rip this one through really quick, and I hate to be that guy, John, and I don't want to ruin a segment, but I'm gonna just band-aid this one and rip it quick. Ross Hilton, I've watched a lot of his fights on the amateur scene, or the regional scene rather. I've seen him get knocked out emphatically multiple times. I've seen him beat an up-and-coming prospect in Rudy Shafroth on national television. Now he's fighting Davion Franklin, who was awarded the Jackson Wink Scholarship. He's 1-0 at heavyweight. I'm looking forward to that fight for selfish, personal reasons because I've seen the guy fight before on the regional scene. It's always exciting there. John Fitch, Naaman Gracie, and your title fight, Patchy Mix and Juan Archuleta, are a lot better than Otman Azaitar and Hakama Worthy and Angela Hill and Michelle Watterson. Now, no disrespect to the UFC. It's a much more diverse card. Overall, it's probably a better card. But to really get into the nuts and bolts of it, I'd sooner see the co-main event from Bellator and the main event from Bellator than I would from the UFC. And again, no disrespect to any of the top 4 fighters on that UFC card. I just want to see old school versus new school in the co-main. And then that Archuleta mix fight, clash of styles, that's the best fight the entire weekend. Out of anything, that's the best fight.
I will, of course, defer to you because I've not yet had the Matt Allen Bellator come to Jesus talk. So when I have that, I'll be much more interested in Bellator. But until then, I will defer to you on any and all matters Bellator. All right, let's move on to some of our social media stuff. Let's start with For the Gram. Craig, Jorge Masvidal has a new training partner, or maybe Tyron Woodley has a new training partner, depending on how you look at it. These guys have both spent time at American Top Team, so I'm sure they've trained together before. So is this gamesmanship based on Masvidal's former relationship with Colby Covington, or does Masvidal actually add anything to Woodley's training camp?
I mean, the cop-out answer, it's a bit of both. And I think having a guy like Jorge Masvidal can definitely help, especially with timing. I think timing for Tyron Woodley's been an issue in his last couple of fights. Everybody kind of says, well, he's gun-shy, but I think a guy like Masvidal can definitely bring the best out of Woodley. I think having that relationship with Covington probably helps. And oh, by the way, it can sell the fight a little bit, and maybe you can get into Colby Covington's head. I think that's kind of what it is.
I agree. I think this is all Colby Covington having to run back through his memory banks and figure out what all does Jorge Masvidal know that I wouldn't want him to know, what all do I have to prepare for potentially, what new wrinkle might Tyron Woodley have that I wasn't expecting to have. Now, the other thing that sort of came out of all this talk was Tyron Woodley saying, I am prepared to let my hands go against Colby Covington. One, do you believe that? And two, is that a strong game plan?
He's not going to do that. He's not going to do that. And Colby Covington's probably going to beat him, and I hate to say that because, again, I'm a Tyron Woodley stan. I was a big Tyron Woodley fan before I get into this game. So, I think I don't see him, this late in his career. If he was going to do that, he would have done it in his last 2 fights, and he didn't. So, yeah, I don't see that happening here, unfortunately.
All right, let's move on to one Twitter hitter. Craig, Sean O'Malley stays in the MMA headlines. Last time out, it was dancing on an injured ankle. Now, this time, in response to those saying he needs to take his loss like a man, he said, in my mind, I'm still undefeated. So he is mentally, not officially, but mentally undefeated. So, Craig, I'll put you on the spot with a big one. Do you think the way Sean O'Malley is handling this loss shows his mental toughness or his mental weakness?
I mean, you know what? He's listening to the criticism. He's responding to the criticism. Holy crow. Everybody gave Ronda Rousey a hard time when she lost, made up excuses, and then, went away into obscurity until the next time she came back and got knocked out. So it's weird. Time will tell. But I don't like this. It's not good. It's not a good look. I mean, we talked about this in the DMs. I mean, Sean O'Malley said before this fight, the only reason why I'm popular is because I'm winning. And, the added bonus is he has a personality. When I stop winning, all of this kind of goes away. So to keep himself relevant, he does this. That's a weird heel turn. I don't like it. It's not good.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what he's, looking for. If you're going to play the Sean O'Malley / Conor McGregor game, it's a balancing act between how much do fans hate you, how much they like you. Are you getting the fans that kind of a little bit hated you to hate you even more? Like, you're trying to make yourself a polarizing figure because in the end, not everybody's going to like you anyway. So why be super agreeable? You just have to be someone that people take a stance on. And he's certainly doing that. So from that perspective, I get it. I just don't know how much of this he's buying into. Obviously the kid is no stranger to marijuana leaf. So who knows what level of sobriety he's in when he says any of this shit. So for me, I don't mind someone who makes strong statements. I make strong statements. I don't mind someone that makes them. If you're open to being criticized, then you can handle it. And the time will tell. And like he said, the one thing I'm in complete agreement with him about is if he wins, everything will be forgiven. And if he loses, he'll be forgotten. So, it's very hard to be a guy. Chael Sonnen, here's our Chael reference, almost got at us without one. He's the only guy I've ever seen lose fights consistently and still remain relevant. And it's a very difficult thing to do. So I don't think Sean O'Malley has what Chael has, which is the ability to not even acknowledge your losses. All right, let's move on to posting to the book. Craig, it came out this week that Frankie Edgar is open to a legacy fight with former bantamweight champion Dominic Cruz. One, do you like this fight? Two, what are your thoughts on legacy fights? And three, give me one other one you'd like to see.
Vitor Belfort, Vanderlei Silva, because it's going to happen. So, I mean, I'm all right with that. I want to see that. Vanderlei looked terrible against Rampage in his last fight, but Vitor didn't look too good in his last fight either. So, am I all right with legacy fights? Yeah, why not? I mean, who didn't love Tito Chuck 3? If I'm looking at this, you were there. If I'm looking at this, it's weird. Because Frankie Edgar, you beat Pedro Munoz in your last fight. Why would you want to dip down and fight Dominic Cruz? It's kind of weak sauce, man. Like, you should want to fight the top guys. A win over Dominic Cruz in the grand scheme of things in the UFC playbook probably actually plays pretty well. Like, it's a nice hand to have. But realistically, man, fight the top 5 guys. Don't call it the number 11 guy after you already beat a top guy in Pedro Munoz. I think it's weak. I don't like it.
Well, listen, for me, we talk about this thing where it's like, and this is a perfect example why there are times when you wonder why the UFC rankings, right? Why you say, not you, people say, what's the difference? Rankings don't mean anything. Why are they ranking this person in a different division if they fight in this division now? Why does that number matter? The reason why the number matters is because with all things being equal for casual fans, when Frankie Edgar's looking to book his next fight, it's better to say he just beat Dominic Cruz, who everyone knows, versus some guy who may or may not have a number next to his name. So if Dominic Cruz is unranked and any other 35-pounders unranked, the Cruz thing carries more weight, no matter where they are in the world in terms of their abilities. So I get it. I'm okay with legacy fights. I challenged you to one, and yours was so good I don't even want to try and top it. I'd love to listen. The last time that Vitor Belfort fought Vanderlei Silva, the only time that Vitor Belfort fought Vanderlei Silva, Vitor Belfort was an 18, 19, 20-year-old wrecking machine, and he ran across the cage and just annihilated Silva before he was the axe. Just annihilated him, and that was that. So I'd be interested to see that too. And I love legacy fights as long as we can kind of agree that they're somewhere on the same plane. Right? And you can never know, but they got to be somewhere on the same plane. All right, Craig, let's tip our caps to MMA Reddit, even though they don't always tip their caps to us. And let's talk about, let's get to start the conversation. This week, Stipe Miocic signed with Vayner Sports, which is run by Gary Vaynerchuk, who is a bit of a sports outsider despite his desires to own the Jets, and definitely an MMA outsider. What do you think this will do for Stipe Miocic? And by extension, what do you think MMA fighters seeking outside representation means for MMA moving forward?
I think that everybody that's listened to the show so far should do me a favor and Google David Klein, who owns Jelly Belly. And if you saw my tweet the other day, because you can't see my phone right there, there's David Klein. It looks like Stipe Miocic in 15 years, and it's absolutely amazing. John, I suggest you do that as well. I learned that the other day. Overall, I think this is great. I mean, if MMA fighters like one half of our main event for UFC Watterson Hill were previously represented by WME, which is a talent corp, was there anything wrong with that? No. I mean, they own the UFC. They represent certain fighters. You win here, you win there. And yeah, I mean, the hand's kind of in the same cookie jar. But I think seeking outside representation like this, I mean, Vayner Sports is also signed on with Curtis Blades, who I've already mentioned before. They're starting to kind of assemble a roster of MMA fighters and other professional athletes. I don't know the other ones, but I do know that they have a number of big name MMA fighters kind of in that stable. I think it doesn't hurt to have somebody like that distantly in your corner. I'm sure Gary Vaynerchuk isn't like, hey, we should sign Stipe Miocic. That'd be pretty cool. I bet, an agent probably has something to say there. Gary's in it with, Angel or seed money or what have you. And Patrick Auger is probably the guy that we should talk to more about this subject. But in my opinion, I think it's good. I mean, as they always say, rising tides lift all boats. So if this can make Stipe some more money, maybe everybody can win out of this.
So unofficially, I'm seeing Lionheart Smith, Ferguson, Alvarez, Weidman, Blades. Those are guys that I'm seeing loosely affiliated with Vayner Sports. Don't quote me on that. It was just a quick Google. But I will say this. I think that what typically happens in MMA is guys get an exit strategy for their careers, right? And sometimes the exit strategy is Hollywood. And that may be what Stipe Miocic is doing here. I think the connection, which I thought was going to happen with WME IMG buying the UFC, it really hasn't so far. I think that with so much content out there and so much media out there, Netflix and all these Hulu, I don't understand why more fighters aren't using their off time to just be on like a TV show or just like pop in, like, if you're Stipe Miocic, why don't you pop into this show or that show or this movie or that movie? I don't understand why they have to wait until they retire. And I know that when you're a fighter, the full-time gig is fighting, but I think that the outside representation may bring outside opportunities, which brings outside eyes, which grows the fighter's individual brand.
I mean, Stipe was cool in that Firehouse Coffee ad, and if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's actually pretty funny. But apart from that, and I mean this, I'm respectful. I try to be respectful, and I respect Stipe's craft both in the cage and outside the cage with the firefighting duties. But also, he sounds kind of like a wood chipper. So it's tough to try and market a wood chipper to be on screen. Now, does he look like a beefed up Tobey Maguire from the third Spider-Man movie? Yeah, a little bit. But when you talk like you have marbles in your mouth, it's a little tough to sell. So I'll leave that there. But I respect the guy. Honestly, I do.
Okay, guys. With that, there you have it. This episode of Early Stoppage on Fight Night Picks is in the books. Be sure to comment on the video. Let us know what you think, what you'd like to see next for the show. Here on YouTube, also iTunes and Spotify. Craig can be followed at Craig Allen FFP. I can be followed at SM Cornerman. The fight has been stopped. We'll see you next week. Craig, say something witty.
You better watch Revisionist MMA after this.
You better. Peace.